Eastern Carolina Village and Farm Museum for inviting me here to Greenville. Some of you may remember, a few of you maybe, Dr. James Battle. He, like me, was a native of Wilson. And I have been following with interest the work that's been going on at Cooper Field and Brown Hill cemeteries, as well as a cemetery in Ayton. So it's really an honor to be here. Where do we look to find evidence of our African American ancestors? Contrary to common belief, their lives are not completely lost to history. Many types of documents and artifacts survive to give us glimpses of African Americans in eastern North Carolina in the antebellum era. With these records, we can say the names of our ancestors again and ensure they are not forgotten. Tonight's talk isn't as much about methods of research, but actually places to explore as we research. We'll move past census records to examine the myriad sources holding evidence of the lives of enslaved people, such as wills and estates records, deeds, church records, government records, newspaper articles and advertisements, obituaries, and oral history narratives. The examples I'll share relate specifically, for the most part, to Wilson County, but can be found for counties across eastern North Carolina. So I want to start with the record that most people are familiar with and tend to think of as kind of being the only thing you can find about enslaved people. So this is a detail of the 1860 census slave schedule of Wilson County. So the federal schedule, which recorded free people, and then there was a slave schedule. And the slave schedule, the way to read this, sometimes it's kind of confusing. These are the names in this column of enslavers here. In this column, even though this is right next to this name, this does not describe this person. These are not the names. These are descriptions of the enslaved people that this person claimed. So the only thing you'll get is age, sex, and color. Color being either M for mulatto or B for black. A few interesting things that you will find in the census record are there are sometimes descriptions such as here, this person is blind. There's a number here in this last column. This is the number of dwellings that an enslaver provided to house the people that he or she enslaved. And then another thing that you'll see in this one is something that a lot of people overlook. This is actually a trust. So some of these are direct ownership, and others of these are, this is John J. Sharp in trust for 5, I think that's Hines heirs. So in other words, this person, Hines has died, his children are minors, they have inherited enslaved property, and John J. Sharp is the trustee who's administering the property. So this again is the most common record that people look for. One thing to remember when you're looking at these is that just because a person's, here's Harris Winsett, who owned several enslaved people, we cannot assume that these people, after slavery, adopted the name Winston. Some did, some didn't. So that's just one thing to consider. But we want to move past these documents to look at probably the richest source of documents, and that's wills and estates. So lots of things you can glean from wills and estates. You can get ages of enslaved people. You can get names for the first time, because they're not names in the census record, but there are names typically in wills or estates records. You sometimes get occupations. You're able sometimes to get evidence of family relationships. You're able to see how families were broken up. You get lots of clues sometimes about where people went over time. I did a project earlier in the year for Scarborough House Resort, which is a bed and breakfast in Saratoga. It's a former plantation. They want to document, honor the enslaved people that built that facility and asked me to research them. And by looking at 3 generations of wills for owners of Scarborough House, I was able to see families move over time from one owner to another. So in this will, what's interesting about this will, this is actually a will that's after emancipation when notice. But here, Sarah Boykin has divided her property between her niece and her trusty friend and former slave, Mary Boykin. So she had 100 acres that she divided equally between Barbara and Mary Boykin, and then the rest of her estate she sold and also divided between them. So this is the only will of this type that I found in Wilson. We don't know exactly what the relationship was here between Sarah and Mary. You know, you always have to be careful about projecting relationships on people. Some people may look at this and go, oh, clearly Sarah loved Mary. Maybe, or maybe Sarah owed Mary some incredible debt. You know, it's hard to know. But it's an interesting, it provides us a look at Mary's life that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Would all we found that race would be?
So these are found various places. The easiest way to find these, and thank you for that. I'll as I go through, I'll tell you sort of where these documents are. Typically, wills and estates are, for the most part, available online, either at Ancestry.com or FamilySearch.org. In counties, most of the older wills, or many of the older wills, have been moved to Raleigh, to the state archives. If they're in the county, they are often in the Superior Court, so the records of the Superior Court. A lot of these have been digitized, though have been microfilmed and digitized. So they are typically readily available. You just have to kind of stumble on the right one. Here is a document found in the estate file of Isaac Williamson. I see I left a digit off, it's 1864. And we get a little information here about certain relationships. Principally, we see that to one son, he left Reuben, Margaret and her child Riley, and then Hitty and Elias. And then to another son, he left Harry, Jacob, Priscilla, and Wesley. When you see a woman's name with children, we typically are talking about children who are under about the age 8. Above that age, they are considered old enough to be bequeathed separate from their mothers. And it doesn't mean that these children aren't also younger than 8. They may not have had a mother who was present at as part of the estate. But here we can reasonably infer that Riney is a young child of Margaret. We don't know Margaret's age, but we also have to remember that typically enslaved women had several children, starting from around age 17 or so, up into their 30s. So this could either be Margaret's first child, or it could be Margaret's last child, who's still
with the property.
Another here is this is an estate record. This is a sale of enslaved people belonging to the estate of Nancy Matilda Emerson. These are actually found in the estate documents of Benjamin Anderson. So Benjamin dies in 1823, and before his estate can be settled, his wife dies. So the enslaved people are sold as a part of her estate. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. And if you notice, this estate sale results in the almost complete destruction of a community. Okay, so the only two people that go together are Henry and Taylor, and they go to Roderick Emerson. Cherry and her child Polly go to Ephraim Daniel. Phoebe goes to Asa Henderson. Emerson, sorry.
Not sure what this thing is. Hobson.
Spencer, actually, it's Spencer. S-P-E-N-C-E-R. Spencer goes to Josiah Horn, and Jenny goes to, this is Jonathan Emerson, actually. Now, if you notice, this is 1829. One thing that you always have to do when you're researching enslaved people is you have to have an understanding, much sort of the broader context of what was happening in a community at a particular time. So the Allisons lived in what is now Saratoga-Stanford area of Wilson County, was then Edgecombe County. This family, pretty much, there are very few Emersons left in Wilson County. This family, its various branches, almost all moved to Alabama in the 1820s, 30s, 40s. And so these folk, the descendants of some of these enslaved people, would have been taken out of North Carolina and into Alabama and on. Anyone here who's African American that has done DNA testing, say with Ancestry or wherever, all of my ancestors are from North Carolina and Virginia. I have tons of DNA matches who are from Alabama, who are from Mississippi, who are from Arkansas, who are from Texas, who say, I have no idea how we could possibly be related. Nobody in my family is from North Carolina. Well, yes, they were. They were there then and sold away. And then here is really one of the most, this will gets me every time. So we can look at the wills and estates of enslavers, but we can also look the wills of people, of formerly enslaved people who died within a decade or so of the war, can be very instructive. So here we have the will of Arch Daniel, who was freed in Wilson County in 1865, died in 1875, and during that period managed to accumulate some property. He gave it to his children, but he included a provision in his will that nothing be distributed for 10 years in order that to give my heirs that has not been heard from since the surrender time to come in for their equal part of my estates. So 10 years after emancipation, Arch Daniel is still hoping that his children will come home. Some of these children were sold away, perhaps. Some of them left to, say, join the Union Army or ran away under other circumstances. But 10 years later, he's still hoping that they will come back to get their share of his estate. So another document, type of document that there are not tons of them, but there are they're quite well known, and they are incredibly detailed in a really awful way. And that, of course, are runaway slave ads. For Wilson, there was no newspaper until around the Civil War. So for Wilson, when you look for these types of ads, you have to look primarily at Tarboro. That was the paper of record. But as you see here, these are papers as far away as Halifax Free Press, the New York Sentinel. This one, this is Courtney. She's 5'6". She's very black. She's 30 years old. And I have no doubt she's lurking around Sparta and Miss Hunter's near Tarboro. I'll give $25. Here's Jada, 35 years old, 5'6" or 7. about the common color, whatever that might be. Tolerably active, has narrow feet. I mean, who knows this type of stuff, right? He has narrow feet, has a small scar over one of his eyes. He may have altered his name. He frequently passes from Stansburg to Newburgh. That suggests that he's a waterman, that he is up and down the Continia to the Tar, and on down to the coast. He has a free wife by the name of Rancy Artis, who lives near Stansburg, and he may be trying to pass as a free man. So this, actually this person was from Wayne County, but in that little corner of Wayne that's very close to Greene and where was would have been Eshart ties. Here's another person, John, 19 or 20, has a scar in his jaw, I think the left jaw, thick ankles. He is a shrewd fellow and will perhaps alter his name and attempt to pass. His father was a free Negro named Hardy Lassiter, living on Toysdale. The Lassiters were a large free family of color, originally from around Gates County, settled in Edgecombe by the 1820s. And here, this is a suggestion that Hardy was a free man of color, but had a child with an enslaved woman. And that child, of course, her status followed mother's status, and the child was enslaved as well. Again, here we have Harry. Please bring him to Toysont Depot. That was the old name for Wilson, one of the original names. $150 for his will be given for his head. He's was lately heard from in Newburgh, where he called himself Harry Barnes or Burns. Will likely change that name. He has a free mulatto woman for a wife who has lately moved to Wilmington and lives in a part of town called Texas. So you see a lot of what motivates people who are running away. Family, right? They are trying to get to spouses who are enslaved, or parents or children. You see a lot of, I think people have this notion that people back before the era of cars, that people just sort of stayed in one place, but you can see a lot of movement up and down, particularly rivers, creeks. You see, this gives a lot of evidence of that. And then we have this really appalling document. This is from the Wilson Ledger, which is one of the first newspapers in Wilson. Look out for your fugitive slaves and runaway Negroes. The subscribers are determined not to be surpassed in the business of Negro catching and have taken particular pains to run into it on an extensive scale. We have obtained from Georgia, as a heavy expense and much trouble, 2 well-trained packs of Negro dogs, which cannot be surpassed for scent of sagacity, blood, or bottom. We will attempt the capture of any fugitive Negro, either in this vicinity or anywhere in the state, at reasonable rates. If you want your Negroes caught without fail, send for Hamlin and Farmer. J.W. Hamlin, Jacob D. Farmer. With, illustrations. And then here, notice, will be sold at the courthouse of the Snow Mill. 18 likely Negroes, consisting of men, women, boys, and girls. Perhaps as beautiful a lot of Negroes as ever went into any market. Those who wish to purchase will do well to attain. Some of you may recognize the name of Wyatt Moy, maybe not. Wyatt Moy is one of the fathers of Wilson County. He was from Greene County, but there's a Pitt County Moy branch. This is all of that group. Wyatt Moy and Joshua Barnes, father of Wilson County, and a man named Robert Adams, who was from around Stansburg, and a guy named Steventon Page, who was from Edgecombe County, were slave traders. They ran slaves from eastern North Carolina, up to Richmond, to the big auction houses in Richmond, and later took them overland in coffles. Coffles are the long lines of people attached at the ankle, attached at the waist, walking. Their favored Deep South auction location was in Mississippi, Aberdeen, Mississippi, Robert. And so there are, and we'll see it in a little bit, some documents that show their sort of movement, their business, from what we call the internal Middle Passage, the internal slave trade from North Carolina, particularly. I mean, this is a little bit early. So we wouldn't assume that in 1829 people were being sold south. The Southwest, as they call it then, had not opened up yet. It was still the land of the Creek and the Seminole. But 10 years later, with the expulsion of natives from Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, land opens up. There's a huge rush of white settlers, incredible cotton growing land, and with them an incredible demand for excess inventory from places like eastern North Carolina, where the soil is worn out from tobacco farming or what have you, and people are leaving to find the better sort of pastures in the Southwest.
I asked you a question. It was so many slaves. Why did they worry about the thing that was unknown?
Well, I think, there's probably a lot of answers to that, but I think one main reason is you have to maintain control, right? You cannot, it's like you can say that about people in prison, right? There's so many people in prison. Why are we worried about them? Because everybody else in prison needs to know you need to stay, agile or valuable. I mean, it's 10, 15, 20 in today's dollars, $20, $30, $40,000 worth of property. If somebody stole your car, it's the same, people are thinking about it the same way. This is a considerable, portion of my income, of my estate. So, yeah, I'm going after it.
Was fun. Was any of it transported by river done here at Shakespeare River? It wasn't see.
For people who lived along those rivers, absolutely. As I said, the records that I'm looking at are from Wilson County. Wilson County is about the upper limits of navigable rivers, but it certainly the Roanoke, the Tar, the Neuse, the Cape Fear, all of these would have been corridors that enslaved people from the interior of the state would have used to try to get to the coast. The coast represented more freedom. If you were in New Bern, obviously a port, or Wilmington, a port, there are lots of people who are not from there. You've got sailors, you've got mariners. It's a lot easier to kind of not be noticed. Whereas if you're in Wilson, or you're in I don't even know, when was Greenville founded?
About 17.
Okay, so Greenville was here. So if you're walking down the street in Greenville, people know this is a strange Negro. He doesn't belong here. People knew that in Lowell. But New Bern, could be a sailor. So people would definitely try to get to the coast. Yeah.
Well, first one, but our ancestor, all I know about him is that he swam the Shakespeare River. He ended up in Georgia. So I just won.
Yeah, I mean, the suggestion for that would be that he swam or walked or waded or whatever down to Wilmington. Cape Fear is Wilmington, yeah. And at that point got a boat and went down to Georgia. That would not be the direction most people wouldn't have wanted to head in that period. But you got away where you could get away. So another set of records, these are not very common. Certainly not for Wilson County, maybe for Pitt. This particular set of records held at the North Carolina State Archives in the Virginia Pooh Dawton papers, and it is basically a farm account. Okay. It's an account book of Robert Bynum, who was a wealthy slave owner in what is now northern Wilson County, was then in Edgecombe. Page after page, he lists the names and births of enslaved people. And he lists them by family. So this is Quinny. He has her born in 1839. And these are Quinny's children. So each page is a woman and her children. Quinny, as it turns out, this is a really well-documented family. She married a man named Valentine Farmer. They lived up around Elm City. The Valentine Farmer family cemetery is very well kept. It's still between Wilson and Elm City. One of their children gave an interview to the WPA, so the so-called slave narratives, and talked about her family. So I was able to connect. I recognized Quinny's name. A daughter is, not sure if she's listed here. But what's interesting also about this is that you notice a lot of these dates are after the Civil War. So some members of his family remained probably as sharecroppers, as tenant farmers with the Bynum family, and he entered their birth dates in this record, even though he no longer owned them. So again, there are not lots of slaveholder records for many reasons. One, a lot of slaveholders destroyed them after the war, right? Here's evidence. It wasn't really clear immediately after the war whether there would be reparations. Would people be able to sue their former enslavers? So what do? You get rid of the evidence. Also, a lot of slaveholders were illiterate. They didn't keep records. A lot of them had very small holdings that didn't require elaborate records. So as you go into the deeper South, where you get to these larger, 100, 200, 300 people on a plantation, you start seeing more elaborate record keeping. You don't so much in Eastern North Carolina, which was not a big plantation area. Another source, church records. Again, not terribly common. The primitive Baptists, of course, were the first churches in Wilson County, is probably Pitt too, and Edgecombe. All the primitive Baptists. So there are early 19th century records surviving for two Wilson County churches. Lower Town Creek Primitive Baptist, which just closed maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and Choiseout Primitive Baptist, which became Wilson Primitive Baptist, which closed maybe 20 or 30 years ago. So here, it's a little difficult to see, but this page records baptisms, and enslaved people here are listed. These are from the 1820s and into the 1830s. So it starts off with, just listed as a servant. And then down here, we get some really detailed, some really interesting information. It lists them with, a servant of these people. You might have noticed before when we saw the estate sale of Nancy Emerson, Ephraim Daniel. This is the same Ephraim Daniel here. So his Edward, who was enslaved by him, was a member of Lower Black Primitive Baptist Church. Typically, primitive Baptist churches are segregated by, worship is segregated by sex. So men, women, separate doors, usually on the church, and then they would typically have balconies. And enslaved people worshipped in the balcony, also men and women.
That's a question. I wonder, back then, did they worship together? These?
No, yeah, there are.
I mean, they had black primitive Baptists.
Correct, but the primitive Baptists were they admitted African Americans as members very early. Around the Civil War, they started, or just after the Civil War, started licensing African American preachers, but only to minister to other African Americans and only under the governance of a white church. The Primitive Baptist, it wasn't until the 1890s that the Primitive Baptists agreed to allow the formation, basically, of Black Primitive Baptist churches. At that time, most African Americans withdrew their membership from white Primitive Baptist churches and formed their own congregations. The one in Wilson, the most famous one in Wilson, the oldest, is London Primitive Baptist Church, which was founded in 1870, but didn't become independent until 1895. And it's still it's still an active church.
These church records, the archives, North Carolina.
These are but these kind of depend. If a church has donated them, they're there. These records are there. The ones for Toys and Up are at the North Carolina State Archives. And these, again, are in special collections. These are not going to be in the search room. These are going to be in special collections. But, again, a lot of churches just don't have records anymore. White churches, they just don't survive. But, again, a lot of churches also would purge records to sort of remove documentation of enslaved members.
This church marked at historical location. Would that church necessarily have their information donated or
No, it just depends on whether it survived, whether it's members, whether somebody valued it. For example, the second oldest Primitive Baptist church in Wilson County is, or maybe the third after this one, is White Oak, which is in Saratoga. White Oak has no records of any sort, really, until fairly late. The church is there. It's very well maintained. There's still burial. I don't think it meets as a church. Micah, does it? Does it? It may. Okay, maybe it does periodically. I don't think it meets I don't think any of them meet every Sunday anymore. They're just the Primitive Baptist denomination is fairly small now. But Micah is, when I told you earlier about the research that I did at Scarborough House, that was for Micah. Yeah. So another type of record that we look for are transactions and court actions involving enslaved people. Bills of sale, right? Sales of enslaved people. These are not common. Okay, it's enslaved people were bought and sold every day. And for the most part, there are no records of these documents. In the same way that most of us do not keep records of our purchases. If it's big enough, if there's something significant about it, maybe we do. If there's some question about, if we want to make sure that our title is clean, so to speak, we might register a sale. And so you can go, this bill of sale was just a loose paper. This is in documents at the among Wilson County records at the state archives. But there are, again, relatively few. You have to go into the deed books, the same deed books that have recorded land sales, to find, for the most part, documents recording slave sales. And what you typically find are not sales. What you find are mortgages. That's what people wanted to make sure was recorded. The sale, okay, I'll sell you somebody. Nobody's going to really question that. But a mortgage, I want to make sure that if you don't pay me the money that I have lent you, that I can prove that you owe it. So I say to you, I'm going to give you $200. You're going to give me a mortgage on Joe. And if you fail to repay me, then Joe will be sold, and the $200 will come to me out of that sale. So you take that down to the courthouse and you record that. And the same way that your mortgage is down at the courthouse, recorded. And when people have their mortgage burning, I paid off my mortgage, and it's marked that way in the courthouse. And here this is a mortgage. This is for a full payment. But you notice, this is for a boy named Wesley, 1858, and the seller gave a warranty that he is sound and healthy. So again, it's like buying a horse, it's like buying cattle. I warranty, and if he turns out not to be, then that's an actionable situation. I can go in and sue. Well, no, you said that Wesley was healthy, and actually Wesley is not. Here we have the documents. White Oak. I don't know if you all know where White Oak is. Other side of Saratoga, north of Saratoga, there is White Oak Swamp, very large, swampy area. The toll road the toll house was on what is now Highway 91, 264 alternate. There's a bridge as it crosses over White Oak Swamp. There used to be a toll house right there. There was an auction in 1856 of Sherrard and Kate. They were owned by actually a group of people who defaulted on a loan. They were put up for auction, and James Barnes, who was one of the former owners, purchased him back at this auction. So this again is in the file the group of records, slave records, which are within the group, miscellaneous records, which are within Wilson County records at North Carolina State Archives. And then here we talked a little bit about Moy, Wyatt Moy a little while ago. Well, Wyatt Moy and one of his business partners, Bartley Deans, who was a Nash County, lived on the Nash County, Wilson County line area, had a little conflict about some people that basically Bartley Deans gave Robert Adams to sell on consignment. So what he says is, I stayed all night near Bartley Deans on my way to Mississippi. I'm going to tell you, Mississippi is where they like to do their business. On the night of September 1948, with a lot of Negroes belonging to Moy and Adams. Moy and Adams is a slave trading firm. That's Wyatt Moy and Robert Adams. And Bartlett Deans offered to sell us two Negroes, Aberdeen and Abraham. We know from another record, this is why you got to keep good notes as you're doing this. There is an estate record for the person who owned Aberdeen and Abraham. And that person says, give this, and sell Aberdeen and Abraham. Well, you want to get the most money, right, that you can get for your property. You're not going to get that in Eastern North Carolina. You're going to get that in Mississippi. So he's trying to get, Deans is trying to get Moy and Adams to sell, trying to sell them these two men for $1,100 together on 1 or 2 years credit with 6% interest. I mean, this is really transactional, right? This is, if ever there were any mistake about it, you see the evidence in the transaction. He refused, but made a contract. We're going to take them with us to Mississippi and hire them out for you until you can get you can get the price that you want. So again, this is within slave records at the North Carolina State Archives.
I could send Martin and Allie to those things.
Moy and they both were basically Wilson County. Moy lived Green, moved around Green, Pitt. Eventually, they all moved to Mississippi and built huge, big old tower plantation houses in Mississippi. But they were from the Wilson, Edgecombe, Green area. And then last year's an interesting document is the indictment of Delisha Eatman for harboring a runaway named Violet. No idea what this is about, except the Eatmans were a family, they were a white family, not uncommon, or more common than we might think. The Eatmans had a fair number of relatives who were enslaved. A number of Eatman men had children by enslaved women. I myself am descended from an Eatman. In my case, the mother of the child was a free woman of color, so my ancestor was a free man, but his father was a white Eatman. There is some suggestion that Violet was in some way related to Delisha and was attempting to shield her from Berkeley Cone, who claimed an ownership right. If we were to flip this document over, there's a notation, not a true bill. In other words, this went to a grand jury, and a grand jury refused to indict Delisha Eatman for harboring Violet. And here we have, again, we're speaking of relationships between free people of color, enslaved people. Here we do have an indictment of Benjamin Price, who was a free man, was indicted for being unlawfully married to an enslaved woman. Easter, who was the property of Dempsey Bonds, that of course was a con. Now we start moving to documents that date post-war, so or during the war and post-war. Documents related to the Civil War. For Wilson County, not a really rich area of documents, probably better for Pitt. The main reason is, again, proximity to the coast. So people are men, I say people, men initially first, and later women and children. Toward the end of the war, women and children started following. But once the Union essentially took control of North Carolina ports, enslaved people across the eastern North Carolina, men, started running away to the coast to join the United States colored troops. So Wilson's a little further away. That's a little bit harder to get down to Morehead City or down to New Bern or down to Wilmington. Again, it's not, the Continia is, you could, at its widest in Wilson County, it might be from here to that wall. So it is not like you can be on a boat going down the Continia and not be seen up in Wilson County. So it was just a harder thing to do. But for sure, there were people who made it. So here we have Henry Barnes, who was 18, Royal Wilson County. He joined, he volunteered for the North Carolina, I don't see the particular regiment, but 14th United States Colored Heavy Artillery in New Bern. So these records are online at Ancestry.com in U.S. Colored Troops Military Service Records. This is from the company description book. This is another person from Wilson County. It says Ned Elferton, and it was Ned Yelverton. He enlisted in Company L, 14th Regiment, U.S. Artillery in Goldsboro. And you notice a lot of these, there are quite a number of these people who enlist at the very end of the war, when things have basically just fallen to pieces. And there is very little control. Slaveholders are able to exercise very little control. And a lot of people are basically seizing the opportunity to leave home. It's interesting, I spoke about the Toysnot Baptist Church records. In the Toysnot Baptist Church records, there's an entry from 1866 in which there is a vote by the elders of the church that basically said, we are going to, there are enslaved people that ran away from their masters before they were actually freed. And we're going to give them until next Sunday to come in and basically throw themselves on the mercy of the church. And if they don't, they're going to be excommunicated from the church. And I'm sure these men were like, okay. Okay. Because they didn't show up. And it was duly noted in the church records that they had been dismissed from fellowship, from Toys R Us for running away. Here, if you find these documents, treasure trove, right? These are pension applications for, in this instance, this is a widow's pension. So this woman was married to a man whose name was Lawyer, he listed as Lawyer Marie, but he was known at home as Lawyer Barnes. Is Barnes a big pit county like it is in Wilson and Edgecombe? And Barnes is the Smith of Wilson County. So he was Barnes, he listed as Marie. He died in 1884, so he did not have an opportunity to claim a pension, but his wife, who at that time had moved to Issaquah County, Mississippi, applied. If you get these documents, they are full of details, because especially a widow's pension, because there were a couple of things that she had to do. The main thing is that she had to prove, number one, that they were married, which was not as easy as you might think, because lots of times people were married during slavery, did not have documents to support that. And then have to prove that there was no other woman who was eligible for this. Also difficult to prove, because very often you had people who had a wife during slavery, was sold away, for whatever reason was separated from their family, and later took another wife. And so the government would have to decide, okay, which person deserves to have the pension. And they would call in witness after witness after witness to testify. I remember so-and-so back in 1853, I've never known him to be married to anybody else. Also lots of information about injuries, lots of information about children, other relatives, who they were enslaved by. Just really, really rich documents if you can find them for your person. Yeah.
My ancestors were widows execution for our fourth great grandmother, and some of the people who were witnesses were actually members of the former slave family. Mm-hmm. He had any insight on what benefit. I knew why, but he had any insight on why my former slavers family be willing to testify to that. I first ran away from their plantation to get their wealth. Yeah.
I don't know that people necessarily 20, 30, 40 years later were hostile to the idea. I mean, they would be, there was an era in which African Americans had to have white people who would vouch for them in all sorts of avenues. And that created, certain webs of obligation that white people benefited from. So, sure, I will provide this testimony, and I expect to see you and your whole family on Harvest Day to do so and so. So I mean, there these webs of these long-standing relationships and obligations that would and it was, I mean, let's be so word of a white person was that's the gold standard. So if your former owner comes in and says, this is what this was, well, this is gold, so if that person, you had a good relationship, you want that person to step in. This is an interesting one. So this is the application of a Black man for a Confederate pension. I'm not one of the folk that believe that there were all these Black Confederate soldiers out here. So let's just go and get that straight. Jim Ellis Dew was what almost all of the men that are called Black Confederate soldiers were. He was actually, he wasn't even a body servant. He sort of took someone's place in a way. He went in as a body servant, and John Dew didn't have to do very much. But he was building breastworks at Fort Fisher, which is typically the type of work that enslaved people and free people of color were put to work doing. He was not fighting, but he talks about being injured here. Our white folks were fired into by some Yankees. I was shot in the wheel of the gun. When one of the balls went into the barrel of our gun and bursted, I was thrown with a piece of the lever of the gun and almost fell into the ocean. A piece of the gun went to my leg, and I've been a cripple ever since. So, again, I know that it's an interesting piece of information. He talks up here about belonging to Hickman Ellis. Ellis is a big Edgecombe County name, who married a Miss Dew. He went in with Jonathan Dew, Miss Dew's brother. While I was in the war, I was known as Jim Dew. When I came back from the war, I was called my older Jim Ellis because I belonged to my missus. So this is 1932, a 94-year-old. There are a handful of these among Confederate pension applications for North Carolina. Freedmen's Bureau records, another very rich source. Not easy to search. There are lots of efforts underway to try to index Freedmen's Bureau records. But the reality is you just have to figure out what field office covered the area you're looking in, and then you just kind of have to slog through them. And but again, incredibly rich sources of information. So in this document, what we had was B.H. Blunt, Nash County, moved into Wilson County, apprenticed 2 boys without the consent of their family. So here is their grandmother who went into the Freedmen's Bureau, the local Freedmen's Bureau office. Wilson was covered under the Goldsboro office. And she testified that these are her grandchildren, that their father lives somewhere else, that B.H. Blunt, who had been her former owner, apprenticed them without her consent, that there is another brother, and I am willing for Daniel Vick to have the boys apprenticed to him that they may assist him in my support. Daniel Vick was her son-in-law, was married to her daughter. Their son, Samuel H. Vick, became a prominent figure in Black Six politics in Eastern North Carolina. So you can get really detailed records in Freedmen's Bureau. This is B.H. Blunt's response. He says, well, first of all, Sam Barry Battle isn't even really their father, right? He's pretending to be their father. And their mother has been dead several years, and maybe their father had bigger fathers. And the boys were, when were born mine, and I have fed and clothed them until they're large enough to remunerate me in some small degree for their expenses. It seems to me it would be a very great injustice to deprive me of their services and to give them up to persons who never contributed 1 cent to their support. Persons, meaning people who had been enslaved themselves very recently. I mean, the entitlement of enslavers who had just lost their enslaved property never ceases to amaze me. The idea that enslaved people owe them something, that they raised people, that they fed them and clothed them, and now they are owed something, is a really prominent theme. Here, freedom of bank records. Again, not that common for a county like Wilson because there was no bank in Wilson. The banks were in Newport and Wilmington. But some people, when they made out their, when they opened their accounts, they indicated their first counties. John Barnes here, Harry Barnes here. What's wonderful about these is that they not only give details about the birth and where they currently live, but these incredible details about their families. Here he says, Alfred D. Lizzie D. Dead. Okay, these are dead relatives. My grandmother, Spicy Barnes. My uncle, Gray Barnes, he's dead. His grandmother lives in Wilson. There's another one that lists, his father, his mother's name, his siblings. So what you see a lot of times is these incredibly complex relationships, and the way that some people took different names even within one family. You'll see people that are talking about, I know I have 2 brothers, but they were sold away 20 years ago and I haven't seen them since. My mother was sold away, my father was sold away. Really poignant information in a bank record. Not something you would necessarily expect to find. We're going to speed up a little bit. So, cohabitation records. This is the Wilson County one. They come in different ways. The original of this record is stored here in Greenville at Georgia Library. It's just a list. It's the man's name, the woman's name, and how long they had been married. The law passed that people had to come. It was in 1866. You had to come in and register your marriage within a certain time in order to legitimate it. And if you didn't, after that point, the marriage was basically null. So another type, different counties did it differently. This is Iredell County. This is my mother's side of the family. Their records look very different. They give Walker and Long Culver and Rebecca living and cohabitating together as man and wife for 13 years. So again, different counties kept these records in different ways, but they're all going to be 1866 when you found out. Obituaries. So now we're again well past the end of slavery, and typically Black people did not warrant obituaries in white newspapers. So if you get obituaries, these are people that are always called worthy Negroes or Negroes of the old school or something like that. Easy for us to try to make a value judgment again about what these people did to become regarded as worthy. But I think, we should be careful about that. What we can say, I think the most we can say is that these are people who managed to negotiate relationships with white people that white people valued. So when these people died, people would talk about, they were she was plain old-fashioned and sensible. She was 89 years old and belonged to Mr. Billy and Jane Block. So this is 1918, and people are still talking about who people belong to. Like, this is a mark of their worthiness. But you see this information, it's valuable information to have, and this is a big source of this type of information, especially this late. So you got Sally Bynum, She belonged to the relatives of Dr. Harris, which is very oversized, but there it is. We have Dick Penwood. We have, this is an interesting one. This is Worcester, Massachusetts. So again, throw out your net very wide when you're looking for newspaper articles in particular, because you'll never know where people wound up. Miss Mcfuta was born enslaved in Wilson, North Carolina, but members get sold for $40. Interestingly, she married a sailor who was African, who was West African, Mcfuta, and they settled in Massachusetts. She died in 1933, and her death was covered in the New York Age, which was an African-American newspaper in New York. Another, Aunt Amanda doesn't even merit like her own name, right? But it's Amanda Kennedy. She had belonged to the family of B.H. Tyson. The Tysons, of course, are the Pitt, Saratoga area family. Those are the Tysons. She was all her life faithful to the children of her former owners, and noble-hearted Mrs. Tyson recognized and appreciated this faithfulness, and rewarded it by rendering her every care and comfort as she went tottering to the grave. Slave narratives. Not a ton from North Carolina. They're much more common in the Deep South, but there are slave narratives here. There are 3 or 4 of people who were enslaved in Wilson County. A couple of those are people who actually were living in another state at the time, but talked about being enslaved in Wilson County. Again, it's very rich. We all know that slave narratives had to be taken with a grain of salt. But here, again, we're talking about movement, right? She says, maybe I was born in New Hanover, or maybe Beaufort County. They were sold to Carteret County, then some of them were taken to Franklin, and then she winds up in Wilson. So just sort of all around Eastern North Carolina. But don't get wedded to this idea that your people are where you were, just because this is where you are. So this is where they've always been, because it might have been anywhere. There's another Henry Roundtree, was born in Wilson County, Roundtree Fairburn, where she's in slavery. She talks about they get her inviting wood splitting days in the winter, floating. And then cemeteries, right? So cemeteries are often the only way we can touch the lives in a way of enslaved people. They are often the only physical things that remain that connect to the lives of enslaved people. And these are just some examples of the headstones of enslaved people that are found in Wilson County. So Hilliard Ellis is 1825. This male is 40 years old, right on Main Street. Richard Barnes was almost 30. Alonzo Terrell, 35. Again, these are all people who are adults at the end of slavery. So just a little, we can recover the lives of enslaved people to a certain extent. We want to seek them out. We want to say their names. Actually, what do they say? If as long as someone says your name, you're never forgotten. So I leave you with a photo of Caroline Sailor's Bunch, who was enslaved in the Black Creek area. What was once Wayne County, later became Wilson County. And thank you.